You're now listening to Male Worship Radio.
That's fine. I think that we should just intro this episode just halfway through that conversation and make it feel like you just jumped into the middle of something. You're like, did I miss the first 15 minutes of this?
Yeah, totally. I was gonna say you got to watch it with cold brew because I don't know about your opinion, I find them really delicious, and it's easy for me to drink like 2 or 3, like if I'm sitting around at a cafe or something. And I got in the habit of doing that last year when I was in LA, and then it all came crashing down on me because I went to I was sitting around at this very gay cafe in Echo Park. I was chilling with the gays that summer, like heavy, and I didn't know, it was kind of also like an hangout. That's why I was there. But I was there a lot. I got in the habit of having a few cold brews during the day, and then I went to a meeting later that night. It was like this super fucking packed hipster like fashion show meeting that goes to. I was like sitting behind him and the other guy that killed Kurt Cobain, and I was on like 3 cold brews, and I was just like staring at the back of their heads, and I had like the worst panic attack of my life. I had to walk out of the meeting. I was like hyperventilating, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was like, nothing's upsetting, and it was the caffeine. And my friend was like, how much coffee have you had today? And I was like 3 cold brews. He's like, yeah, don't do that. It's stupid. I wore this shirt accidental, and then I realized it was 30 years ago Friday that he was killed. So
it's good that you wore it anyway, since Nirvana gets brought up in every single episode.
Yeah, and I figured it'd be the least cool shirt ever to people our age. It's my
I didn't really understand it, but I did see some weird short about how Gen Z is like super into Nirvana.
Yeah, well, it's weird because there's no generation gap with them, because I was talking to my friend Casey, who's like 35. So I guess he's, I don't know, is that Gen Z now? But yeah, like it's interesting. I was thinking about that though, because with Nirvana and Gen X, like us, there was a big generation gap between us and like our parents' music. Huge.
Oh, yeah. Like our parents found our music intolerable.
Right. And vice versa a lot of the time. I mean, some of us were like privy to like the Beatles or something, but I don't know about you, but I wasn't really that. Sabbath, maybe when I heard it, but no, it's not true, because I was like a classic rock kid before I was into all that shit. So I definitely was listening to like AC/DC and all that shit. But Nirvana was a huge break from all that. And it's interesting because I don't think since then there's not a lot of generation gap with the appeal of them. Like I was saying, I was talking to my friend Casey, and I was just asking him like what his impression of them is. He was like born in the early 90s. He's like, I love them. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's just endure.
I wonder if it has, this is like so random already, which it was the goal, so it's good. But I wonder if there's part of that appeal is that the mega mistake of Gen Xers, like with kids, was the unwillingness to push anything on kids out of like fear of being like overbearing. Even just the idea of like how no Gen Xer put their religion on their kids in general. Like, obviously, that's not true across the board, but like that's right. Like a pretty basic thing was that everybody was like, this is what I believe. You'll figure out what you believe. And because of that, there was definitely, I don't think, like, or if I listen to Mouthpiece in the car with one of the kids, I don't go, oh, this is awesome. You're going to love this. This is, you know what I mean? I just am like, I'm picking the music today. We're listening to Chain of Strength or whatever, or Slayer. Right. And then if the kids like it, then it's like, oh, if you like that, you might like this. But it's never like, yo, you have to listen to Public Enemy. It's more just like, this is the mood I'm in, and this is age appropriate for you. Maybe there's less resistance to essentially classic rock because their parents weren't forcing Nirvana and who knows, like what would be like Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and whatever else like down their throat. Yeah. So that like when you discover it, or when you see all these celebrities wearing vintage Nirvana shirts, and then you're like, what's Nirvana? And maybe you actually just listen to them because you don't know that they're just wearing the shirt because it's cool looking. That then you're like, oh, this is awesome.
I got to be careful because it's such a big topic, but they're in the stratosphere of the Beatles or something, where they're just so part of the firmament of rock. They, like the Beatles, changed everything, and it happened so quick. I was actually thinking about this. It's almost less about Nirvana, but it is about Nirvana, and that, like, you're old enough, I'm old enough. Growing up in the 80s, music on the radio was largely insufferable. It was,
Yeah.
and it seemed so unobtainable. It was like, who are these fucking dudes that look like women, like spinning around and guitars, like just the hair metal aesthetic, but it was also just sort of largely rock, was just like stupid.
Yeah, like you remember like early MTV, like Bryan Adams all the time.
God, man, but
it was like Bryan Adams and Def Leppard.
But even worse than that, just like White Snake. I don't know. I was watching something on YouTube, and it was studio and guitar instructional by this guy Dan Huff. But he's a cheeseball, but he's also really well respected. He's played on like Michael Jackson records. Like he's like a session dude from LA. And all of his suggestions are good ones, but they're also a little like that aesthetic. And that's exactly what rock was. And it's just interesting that Nirvana, who at their heart were obviously, I mean, they were definitely just sort of a punk band in a way, like the whole attitude about it, obviously, but also sort of rooted in hardcore. But in any case, overnight, they just, I mean, it wasn't Pearl Jam that was, I mean, Nirvana was the band that knocked it down. It was like the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I was just thinking too about how if you listen to like 80s rock, half the time the guitars don't sound like guitars. You like seriously question whether they're guitars or synthesizers. The drums all sound fake. Processed. Like even listening to something kind of awesome. This is so funny. I was watching Dire Straits reaction videos one day.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Don't ask me how I ended up down that rabbit hole. What was that song? The big one.
Money for Nothing?
Yeah. Which it turns out rules. Yeah, because the production on it is so weird. So fake and plastic sounding but the songwriting rules. It's so good. Like it's weird. It's so good. Like there's no denying. It's so unbelievably good. That song rules. But the production is super weird on it. It's very plastic and fake sounding.
It's interesting because like I think the reason why it rules is because he's a really good writer. But I mean, I'm not a Dire Straits. I don't know much. I know some, and I think some of these guys from the 70s, because they were essentially kind of a 70s band, like ZZ Top as well, and Yes as well, obviously. Like Yes had a huge 80s weird production sound, Owner of a Lonely Heart, you know? I was like, oh, yeah. I won't sing it. But yeah, these dudes just knew what the fuck they were doing. But again, to get back to like the garbage of the 80s, you put that stuff in the hands of like somebody of lesser talent, and there were plenty of these bands and producers by the late 80s, and it was just garbage stew. I don't know. That had to go away. It is interesting how quickly it happened. And to get to like what we were about to talk about, that we need to get to talk about, my comment earlier about the Lincoln demo was like, wow, like I listened to it a few months ago, but then listening to it quickly this morning, I was like, yeah, that 80s production aesthetic like bled all into like hardcore and punk in the early 90s as well, to a certain extent. And there's so many examples of it.
I also listened to that Lincoln demo that like night that it appeared
2 months ago. Yeah.
And I listened to it again this morning. The thing about it, and this has nothing to do with the production, I feel like it justifies every opinion that I have about Lincoln already, right down to their like 80s Discord influence is like way more apparent on the demo, but they also kind of sound like Encounter. The first song sounds like Encounter or maybe like Four Walls Falling. You really see the tension between the injection of contemporary at the time hardcore and the sort of 80s melodic hardcore thing that they were doing in Ice Fan. But the other thing that to me it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt is how good their taste was, that those other three songs were not on the 7-inch. The best song was on the 7-inch, and then three other songs that are equally as good as the best song, that's the 7-inch. If that demo was the 7-inch, it would be like, oh, this is pretty cool. Yeah. It wouldn't be like, yo, this is incredible.
Yeah, the editing there is good, because it's only that one song that made it to the 7-inch. Yeah, that's pretty smart, because the other stuff's fine, but it's like, it's nothing. Union might have been the, no pun intended, but the seed of maybe those other three songs. Like, I think only like a small group of people would get that pun. Yeah, it does kind of seem like there's two steps of evolution representative of that band sound on the demo, which is that sort of like more pop punk, almost lookout sound to some of those other tracks or something. My finger on it. What's that?
Yeah, it's definitely not as heavy. It's like funny because like I sort of hear like in the first song I heard a little bit more hardcore. It's funny because you want to do a Flagman episode and it's like listening to those that first song in particular. I'm like, oh, this song, this belongs on Watermark at the time. But then I'm so glad that song
I agree.
is not on that 7-inch and that like it's the heavy stuff. You can tell it's the same band, but you can tell that with Union, they got the formula right. That like literally the almost sludgy, heavy thing meets the melodic jawbox crunch or whatever.
I think that maybe that seems like that's what the discovery was in that song. They figured out, oh, we can do this pop, this sort of the other thing, hardcore punk kind of poppy, whatever, like, or just, but then go heavy marriage of those two. And maybe that was coming from the Godflesh influence, maybe. The more I listen to that 7-inch, and I think we said it in the other episode, I really do hear that the Godflesh influence, if there is one. Things along those lines, because the drums are almost like so, like the way they recorded on the 7-inch, the snare sound almost sounds like it has the whatever the trap off it, so it's got more of a pop to it, almost.
Yeah. It's more of a pop than a crack.
And that guy's so tight on the kit and the fills, though, but they seem so influenced by the drum machine, like with the pop of the snare.
You've got me listening to Black Sabbath, and the Lincoln record, the heavy parts make more sense to me in the guise of Black Sabbath than hardcore at the time. But maybe all hardcore makes more sense to me now, having listened to Black Sabbath.
I was just going to say, I think once you connect with Black Sabbath, everything else makes sense. And it's interesting because, I mean, I've been a fan for a long time, but like I was reconnecting with it because we were talking about it and things were making even more sense to me. I was like, wow, these guys they're in some ways, I think, to what we like, you know, be it hardcore or metal or whatever. It's a given that Black Sabbath are like the Sabbath and Zeppelin, maybe. You got to give Zeppelin a lot of credit too, because they were kind of doing not similar things, but definitely both foundational to metal. But Sabbath is more important to me than the Beatles, you know, easily. But that's interesting. So we're talking about Nirvana, and I think Nirvana relate to the Beatles more than they do Sabbath.
At this point, I should learn my lesson on this kind of idea, which is that intellectually, I'll understand that some band is important for something that they did, but then I'll just file that away as a basic understanding of context. Like an example of this is I didn't like discover the Beatles until I was like 32, 33 or something like that, like old, basically. And I only bought a Beatles record because I was like in a Starbucks. And in my view, the Beatles is like music you listen to around babies. And so I bought like, I don't know, the White Album or something because I had a newborn baby. That's literally why I bought the Beatles. I was like, oh, yeah, like Rocky Raccoon. This is like music for kids. That's legitimately what I thought. And then I had a giant Beatles phase for like a year.
That is a lot of Gen Xers' first musical exposures to the White Album, actually, because a lot of our parents were hippies, you know, and my parents weren't quite hippies, but we were like hippie adjacent.
Yeah, my mom used to play Rocky Raccoon on her guitar to us as like a lullaby. In my head, like that's what the Beatles is. And it's like I knew like some of their like first big like pop hits, but I didn't fully grasp it. And then it's like you listen to it and you're like, oh, this is incredible. My experience with the Beatles should have told me that I need to be listening to Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin. I've tried listening to Led Zeppelin and it was like never, it just didn't grab me. And maybe it's like I wasn't being patient enough. Maybe I was doing the thing where you're like, oh, I should check out Led Zeppelin. You start skipping halfway through songs to see if aesthetically you like anything. I don't think I've ever truly sat down and just like listened to a Led Zeppelin record. And it occurs to me that I've never actually sat down and listened to a Black Sabbath record and just patiently taken it from front to back. Like I know War Pigs, but apparently I don't know War Pigs because there's so many riffs in it that I was like, what is this?
So like, your first exposure wasn't Faith No More's cover of that? Because I think that's the first time I heard War Pigs, because it's on that
No.
That epic record. Oh, okay.
I've never heard it. I've seen a Faith No More video, but I've never heard a Faith No More album. No, I know that maybe Fred Gall skates to it in the Habitat Mosaic video. I think that like a lot of the Sabbath I've heard has been in skate videos, and then a bunch of other stuff. There were so many songs I didn't know were Black Sabbath. Like that kind of shocked me. I was like, oh, this is Black Sabbath? I know this song. I did not know that this is who it was by. And I feel like at this point, I now need to just like learn my lesson. If something is widely considered important, it's worth just like shutting off the bias machine or the filter that you put things through and just be like, all right, let's just take it. Just take it from the top and see. And it's like, dude, like Paranoid. I'm so into Paranoid. And then it was funny because I was listening to this stuff and I was like, man, I know this riff. What is this riff? And I was like, oh, it's a Quicksand riff.
For a little while, I thought the two most important bands in the development of the whole, like Sabbath are like the fathers of metal. There are bands before Sabbath that could argue it, like Blue Cheer is sometimes like, they're kind of considered the first super, super duper heavy band. It's like 1967 and it's just like, what the fuck? Like it's so raw. Yeah, Sabbath, once you understand like what's going on there, you understand, okay, there's that. And then for me, the next major development for metal was like metal was like, or like in terms, again, I guess I was thinking of it in terms of like things that you and I were acclimated to through hardcore or punk or whatever, would have been Slayer. I mean, other people would say maybe Metallica or something, but I think for a hardcore kid that grew up in the 90s, Slayer and Sabbath were pretty primary.
Metallica is funny to me because, like, you know, it's like I was listening to a lot of Slayer over the last like couple years. Like, actually just everything, but they're definitely the late '80s records. You know, I'd be like, oh, I remember I used to really like Kill 'Em All and Master of Puppets and stuff, and like, yo, I cannot listen to those records. I don't know what it is. I listen to Metallica, and all I think is, why am I not listening to Slayer?
For me, it might be a partial nostalgia, but I find them pretty good. I always like Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets a lot too.
Yeah, it's really weird. I listened to all of those a lot in like when they were current, which is weird. Like I had to have been through other skateboarders, like either giving me tapes or like listening to stuff like when we were driving to, I don't know, like a contest in Connecticut or something. Because it's like, I'm like, why was I like 10 listening to Metallica? Like how was that stuff on my radar? And obviously there's like the Pusshead connection. So you have like a Thrasher or skate connection. So it's not like insane.
Well,
there's this weird thing, which is like I get like embarrassed and I'm like, I bet you could relate to this, but like you consider yourself like a music lover in general. I don't consider myself like, oh, a metal fan or a rap fan or whatever. I just consider myself like a music fan. And so when there's something so seminal and so important, and then you haven't actually listened to it, I always feel like embarrassed. Like, why am I just now finding this out? But then you forget that like you can read an Unbroken interview, right? And they can be like, we broke up because if not, we would have turned it to Drive Like Jehu, which would have been cool, but that wasn't what Unbroken was. And it's only now that you can go, let's Drive Like Jehu, and immediately check it out, right? Like within at most the last 15 years, and maybe even less than that. So it's also weird to be like embarrassed that you haven't listened to something when it's like, well, I didn't have a Black Sabbath record. And out of the money I had, am I going to go buy a 50-year-old record, or am I going to go buy something new and exciting? You know what I mean? So it's like a weird, like, I don't know, tension or conundrum, because I'll be like, well, Ted Nugent, I'll be like listening to something and be like, how did I not know about this? And then be like, well, it's totally reasonable not to have known about it. You can't listen to all the music. There's only so much, you know, that you can take in.
You come across this stuff on your own time. And I think we're like fully, maybe some of us that have been kind of into music and different culture and stuff. But that whole thing about music and snobbery or elitism where it's like, oh, you didn't get into the Beatles in like the mid 90s, like the rest of us, when Elliott Smith was like obsessed with it, and the Shins, or the Shins are kind of more Beach Boys, but there was like a time where it was like very cool to be sort of like talking about like Pet Sounds and like Sgt. Pepper's and all this. So it was like
these things hit the zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist, yeah. So some people think, so what? I mean, like that, you know what I mean? Like at the same time, while I was into that, I was missing out on like whatever was going on in like, say, I don't know, I'll just like, as for an example, like Stone's Throw or just like a different genre. Same with like other things that aren't even music. Like I don't know what was going on in skateboarding for years, still don't, or like, you know, but I'm still interested in skating. And then I'll discover something about like some skater, and my friends that are more like you will be like, oh yeah, totally. So like with Sabbath and all that, or just discovery of these things. Oh, that was the point I was going to make. My late discovery, I feel, for me, it's even cringier because it was a super zeitgeisty late discovery for a lot of people, was the Grateful Dead. Because there's been a huge, like in the last, like, I don't know, since 2015 resurgence of touring in some form with John Mayer. And I think everybody got re-interested, and younger generations discovered the Grateful Dead. Again, it's happened several times. It happened in the 80s too. But for me, it happened around my early 30s, I guess. I just wanted to make the point. It was sort of like Sabbath. Like there was nothing about the culture that I was attracted to. It had more to do with like hearing it on my terms. Like I heard Europe 72 and I felt like this sounds like a Drag City record, because it's them touring at their most. I think they have one drummer, they usually had two drummers, so they just sound like a straight band, and like they kind of jam, but it's like not what my idea of what the Grateful Dead was at all. And then I was like, shit, what's this all about? Because I have Deadhead friends for years since high school. I'd always like get gently suggested in that direction. I'm like, fuck that. The Dead, Jerry Garcia, like, no. But I had to hear it on my own terms. I think it was moving to California, honestly, that did it to me, because everybody's into them out here, you know? Mm-hmm. But that being said, like, hearing it on your own terms, like you with Sabbath or me with the Grateful Dead, kind of means hearing it objectively without the influence, as you were saying, by like your parents or like peers of like, here, you got to hear this. This is why this is amazing. That's not how these things end up making like the impression they should. I think they do because you just stumble across it, or somebody goes, hey, check this out.
I think the other thing that happens is that presumably, because not across the board, but, you know, like when you're younger, there's this whole thing of like finding or defining your identity. You know, this is this thing where you become this insufferable person that's only into one kind of music because that's your identity. But hopefully you loosen up and chill out about that. And so that then you're just more willing to check stuff out or to hear it. Like when you know, it's like so funny because it's like, you know, out of all the unexpected things I would not think I would be doing, seriously scouring the Ted Nugent catalog for bangers. That was not on the cards. And it's like so funny. You know, if you send me something and I'm like in a music mood, I'll check it out. But you sent Stranglehold, which I like, depending on my mood, I might have listened to or not. But then you were like, this is basically Hoover with guitar solos. And I was like, what the fuck? So I like put it on and was like, holy shit, this is so good. It's incredibly good. I mean, the idea that you have an 8.5-minute song with the same bass line throughout the entire thing, the drums don't do anything special, and then Ted Nugent soloing, but it doesn't sound like soloing. Like it's not beautiful. Like that's the thing that's so incredible about it. It's like it sounds so pretentious, but he's just making that guitar sing. Like
he's an amazing guitar player. He's one of the best guitar players, I think. Yeah, I like had a moment with that. Not that, but just listening to that record, and then just in general, there's something about his playing that because I don't know if I prefaced any of this. Like I play guitar, and I've been, you know, on the recording at least, and so I've been playing a lot. And I don't like listen to people and then go try to imitate them, but I'll hear people sometimes, or certain guitar players that you connect with as a player. That was my experience with the Nuge, is I was just like, holy shit, like that was my epiphany. Wait, this guy might be the dude. There's something about the way he's super melodic. You know, then again, I'm not like a trained guitar player. We came from hardcore. I taught myself how to play, but like you said, he makes the guitar sing. It's interesting too, because you watch those live clips. I'm so dumb. I didn't know anything about him. I thought he was the one on lead vocals, and because they have this other dude. And so Ted Nugent, the act, is literally just him showcasing his the guitar. Yeah, Ted Nugent, what a shame. I mean, in a way, he's probably has a personality disorder or something. I don't know what's wrong with that guy. But
I mean,
it is
to be known like solely for your, I mean, it happens to anybody that's got a big mouth, right? Because even like the resurgence of Unwound is because Unwound were incredible, and Unwound never overshadowed their music with their opinions. The lack of a Fugazi resurgence is because all anybody remembers about Fugazi is their opinions, and nobody needs to revisit a band because the band didn't play $10 shows. Like, who gives a fuck, right? And that's, unfortunately for Fugazi, that's the legacy of Fugazi, is their opinions, which is fine. There's worse things to have a legacy for, you know what I mean? But like, basically, they are a band that was more than music, and unfortunately, because they were about more than music, they're known for everything besides the music. When, you know, they're like an incredible band. Drive Like Jehu did not make shocking statements. I don't know why this is, but this is like my theory, is that like, if you become known for something other than the music, it becomes very difficult for the music to come back. And Ted Nugent is like a prime example of that. Like, I just know Ted Nugent as like a sort of cartoon character talking head on Fox News.
Well, and on point with what you're talking about, you know, Ian MacKaye has sort of cited Ted Nugent as being a big influence. Not on politically, but just in terms of music. We talked about it because I was like, oh yeah, because I realized it years ago, actually, because you were like, I'm real late to Void. I thought I was late to Void because I got into Void like in my late 20s or something. And I was like, how did I never fucking hear this? But the first thing I did hear in that sound, like, I forget what song is it. Is it Who Are You or whatever? There's one, it just comes in. It sounds like a super hacked version of a classic rock song, but like fast, like the riffs are just like they swing kind of in a similar way. Like, I just thought, oh yeah, classic rock. But I think for a lot of punks, East and West Coast, because I think Keith Morris talks about like going to see Ted Nugent a lot whenever he'd come to LA, and Greg Ginn, like all the LA Black Flag dudes and shit like that. I think Nugent was like big with all, because in the 70s, you got to understand, like, to a lot of people, before 77 and the Sex Pistols and all this shit, there was not punk.
No, you listen to like rock music, like what's now classic rock. Like every early hardcore punk band, when they talk about the music they got into, they talk about going to see Ted Nugent, Kiss, all that stuff.
Yeah, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Zeppelin, all of it. I mean, obviously, like, punk existed as an idea. Like, the first Ramones had been around since the early 70s, Suicide as well. And then there's like proto-punk and all this shit. Just in terms of just like the average young adolescent guy, let's just like be real, it's sort of male music, you know. Obviously we're talking about Ted Nugent, although I know he had a lot of female fans as well, but it is sort of like testosterone rock, and I mean that in that sense. That's why it rules, you know what I mean? That's exactly why I like it. And but yeah, at the same time, like but also like Ted Nugent is and was sort of known as a really great guitar player. Like, I don't know how much you dug, I'm not an expert, but his, you know, his 60s psychedelic band, the Amboy Dukes, were largely, you know, I think they were on the Nuggets compilation, or
I haven't gotten into that yet. That's like next.
But they were important, and I made a joke, but I think it is true. Like, they're big. I think they did have some success with their single "Journey to the Center of Your Mind," which is about LSD. And Ted Nugent famously was in the band playing. I think he might have quit over it, but he was like, because he's notoriously like basically straight edge, and he claimed like he had no idea it was about LSD, and that's sort of funny because it's just so obviously about LSD, and he's like, I thought it was about like self-improvement or just you know,
it's so funny. I thought that for a minute the thing was going to be that he wrote a song about LSD despite being straight edge, kind of like how LL Cool J had that song. I can't remember what song it is, but there's that line, you tell me don't drink and drive, I say what is this, mind your business. But LL Cool J never drank.
Why'd he write it? Just to sound cool?
Yeah, it's kind of like how Tyler the Creator has like a whole song about weed, but he's never smoked weed or drank in his life.
Oh, well.
It's sort of like just taking part in the culture. It's like how if you start a black metal band, you got to talk about Satan.
Weed. How can you be from LA and remember? Is he against smoking weed?
Yeah.
Why? Is he straight edge?
I think that that's a really common thing with like ultra high achieving people.
Well,
it just seems to be like there seems to be a subset of like, you know, if everyone on the planet knows who a person is, there's a decent chance that person is borderline intolerantly straight edge. They probably don't even know the phrase, but they are like instinctively straight edge. I'm surprised by how often I'll see
like Vincent Gallo. But yeah, I guess he's maybe not highly regarded as successful, but he actually is very successful in real estate. But like he's never touched a drop of alcohol in his life.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm trying to think if Vince Staples is like that too. If he's another one, he might be. I can't remember, but I know that Tyler the Creator is one of them.
Yeah, I get it. It's just kind of, it's surprising and refreshing, I guess, because in LA it's just so ubiquitous, especially with like rap dudes and like, I think he's like from Fairfax, which is like sort of the.
Well, I think the other
area
is, you know,
what's that?
I think the other thing is that if you have someone that does that level of achievement, that kind of obsession, it's really best probably. You know, it's like if you meet someone that's hardcore straight edge in their 30s, they should stay that way. They should definitely not make a change, because if you're a hardcore straight edge at 35, you are going to be on heroin in a year if you start smoking cigarettes.
So you got to bleep this one out or edit it out. But like, like that broke edge at like age 45 or whatever. And I don't know what the story is, but the few times I've seen him since that's happened, he seems a little slushy. Like he seems like he's got a drinking problem. I shouldn't laugh about it, but
I got a good friend he's definitely straight edge. He's probably 50, and it's like I think it's best he stay that way. I don't see anything good happening if he starts drinking wine.
Why were we talking about that? Oh, because we were talking about like
Teddy. It's a journey to the center of your mind.
And Ted Nugent and so I wonder, this is speculative too, how much that sort of like abstinence position of too, because I think he made a big deal of it in the 70s. Wasn't his whole thing like, I'm just all about like fucking ripping on the guitar and like basically like he was really into women. That was his like main thing. But like his other
he acts like it. I don't know, dude. It's so funny, that record, because
I love the production on it too. Actually,
the stuff where he lets like a note kind of ring out and then it pans. I think that's that, unless I'm thinking of Black Sabbath. But I think that happens on that record. It's so good. And I was thinking about how much emotional range there is in his guitar playing, which is so funny because then the lyrics are just like, baby, let's do it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's no substance really to a lot of the lyrics. Like the production on Stranglehold. I mean, we could talk about but we won't. But you could just pick that apart on that track alone. Or we also have to understand, like the 70s, the radio was very different. What was it? AOR radio. It's like long format. Yeah.
It's shocking that would be something that would be on the radio. Like I guess so. It's something of that length.
Well, I think that was as I was saying. Like I think that was the format back then. Was like long tracks were like. I think it was called AOR. I think because Pink Floyd had long tracks too. Like I think that was just how it went it might have been like late night programming or something. It wasn't like all the time because it was like every band had like 8 minutes.
I found it. But album-oriented radio.
Yeah. So it was interesting for a little while, it's gone now, but in LA, like 10 years ago, there was a station on the FM dial and people were kind of flipping out because it was called The Sound, and they brought that shit back, and they had like real DJs, which is kind of rare now for like, FM radio, like, or, commercial radio. They had ads and stuff, but they did exactly that. Like they would play, I think that's where I started hearing Stranglehold more on the radio. It would just be like, they'd play album sides, like the full Pink Floyd album side and stuff. And,
that's cool.
Yeah. It has a lot to do, I think, with the drugs people were doing in the 70s.
Yeah. It's so much stuff, right? And like I was thinking about this in regards to, Black Sabbath. Like some of the, like War Pigs is really long. And a lot of that stuff on that record is really long on Paranoid. And then I was, it's like, why is everything now 1.5 to 2.5 minutes? But it's like, it's competing with everything, and it's like a song on the radio in 1970 is only competing with other songs on the radio and maybe the 8-track in the car. And the other thing is that if you get to hear that Sabbath song for 6 minutes, then you don't have to hear some other bullshit during those 6 minutes. And whereas now everything is competing with everything at the same time. And it's interesting, maybe the inverse to that is the reason that movies have not decreased in length, and that like bullshit popcorn movies are like pushing 3 hours, is because it's like the one place where phones aren't tolerated, like movie theaters, that you can actually expect someone to sit through a thing for 2 hours and 50 minutes or whatever insane length of time for like a Batman movie, is because like a significant part of that I don't know, like life cycle of that content is people sitting in a dark room where it's discouraged to look at your phone. And it's kind of like radio or like albums at one point were sort of that same thing. Like they didn't have to worry about whatever, you know, like TV was only going to be good for 2 hours a night in 1970, I would think. So much less competition.
Yeah, there's so much now. I mean, it's tough to mitigate for a lot of people, I think, you know.
The one other thing I wanted to like touch on, like with the Ted Nugent, our first episode was about Rye Coalition, and it's not as apparent on their early records, their sort of classic rock influence, or it wasn't as apparent to me. On Top, which is like their third record from maybe 2001 or something like that, the classic rock influence is heavy duty. But I guess the thing that when I was listening to Ted Nugent, I was like, oh shit, I loved this. And there was like a song where I didn't like the song. I think it was on the self-titled Ted Nugent record, but the opening riff, I was like, this sounds like the Rye 7-inch, like the first 7-inch, and then it goes into some kind of like honky tonk type joint that I don't dig. I do not like the like honky tonk shit with the pianos and whatnot. But there were so many moments where I was like, oh, Rye. And then you brought up Ian MacKaye, and I sent you a link to something from another Ted Nugent record. I was like, this legit sounds like Fugazi. Like it sounds like late period Fugazi, which is like and it's like totally makes sense. But it's like, to me, the thing I always register with Fugazi more is the Beatles influence, and I feel like I hear the Beatles influence a lot in Fugazi, but I wasn't aware of as much the sort of classic. Yeah, totally. And then
that is interesting.
It was funny that you brought up the Grateful Dead, because with like Stranglehold, and it's like you compared it to Hoover, and it's like so funny. So it's like not an unfair comparison to be like, this is very similar to Electrolux with its like it's like unconventional guitar soloing. Like I like that Alex Dunham does guitar solos. It's just they tend to be feedback and like single notes kind of singing out. They don't tend to be like a traditional guitar solo, which is similar to Ted Nugent. And then I was like, this reminds me of other stuff, but I don't know what it reminds me of. Like, and I'm like running through my head of like touch and go type bands, or, you know, I'm like, is it like a shellac thing? Like, what do I know of that sounds like this? And then I was like, I wonder if this is what the Grateful Dead sound like. Because I legitimately have zero clue, except that I know of the idea of the like jam band. And it did make me wonder, like, I wonder if I actually need to finally do this thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that is what the Dead sounds like, but it's also hard to say what the Dead sounds like because they had a lot of different sounds, and it's such a huge topic. I hate saying this because it always makes me sound like the biggest Deadhead, and I'm really not that big. I like the Grateful Dead, and I consider myself like the smallest Deadhead, really. Like, in summary, I think that they summarize like American music up until a certain point, because they have bluegrass, they have blues, they have country, they have rock, they have jazz. Through the time that Jerry was alive, as soon as I start talking about this shit, I feel like one of these cheese balls. But anyway, they had their sort of initial period, which with Pigpen, who died prematurely, but he was sort of like the way the Rolling Stones had their Brian Jones period, which was like a distinctly different Rolling Stones from after he died. Brian Jones basically founded the the Stones. Like he was, that was like his band. In the same way, not that the Grateful Dead were Pigpen's band, he was very central to it and was very much sort of the like heart and soul and the leader of the band, not Jerry, even though Jerry was sort of like the Nugent character, like the virtuoso guitar player. But in terms of like jam, yeah, like I can see where some of the Nugent stuff, but it's more hard rock. Like Nugent still has like, and the Dead don't have much hard rock to them, except for the Pigpen era, which was like late 60s, which if you heard one of those live shows, it sounds like the most lively rock and roll show ever. But
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, the Dead are great. Again, Europe 72, which is like a core, I think it's like a triple or quadruple album, all live and stripped down, just one drummer. That was the record that it was like, it reminded me of the stuff I liked in the late 90s, which was like Drag City stuff, like the Palace Brothers and stuff. But the real deal, it was like, oh, this is what I should be listening to. This is American music. Like the Grateful Dead are pretty quintessential, honestly. I hate saying that because the whole scene around it is not really my thing. But we could talk about Kirk Windstein. He's like the main Crowbar guy. Yeah, it's like that. I don't know what the deal is, but it seems like that band's sort of him with other guys. But those are his riffs and songs, I think. Yeah,
they're pretty rad.
I love them. Yeah,
my biggest takeaway is I am seriously wondering if the artwork is on purpose bad.
Can't be,
because it's so consistently bad, and that like the one with the faces.
It's so that how could that be on purpose? It's so bad. It is, and fuck, man, it's a good record. That's the thing that's like, yeah, it's pretty bad.
These are definitely records where if I were to judge them by their cover, I would not be listening to them. Everything is bad. The logo is bad. The treatment of the type on the logo is always bad. And then they have the cheesiest art. But
the worst. There's not an exception either, right? Like it's consistently bad every time. It's like right?
Yeah. That's what was where I was starting to be like, what if this is like a joke? Like, what if it's funny, like to make the worst artwork possible? The one where it's their faces melting into each other. I don't remember what record that is. The one from like 2003.
Yeah, and the one top center sort of looks like an obese woman or something with like that's like throwing like faces out of it. Like it looks like it looks like reminds me is like a straight to video like Z-grade horror movie, like DVD.
Totally.
You know, it's really bad. No,
and that one was a cathedral.
Well, at least that one, like the colors are, what is this, like yellow and blue or something? Like that one is almost like, okay, boys, like he almost kind of, it's not offensive. It doesn't like, it's not distractingly bad, like some of the, or at least like as bad as the face one. Nothing.
I just think it looks like so stock photography, like jammed together, that it's hard for me to not think that it's just the worst.
You know what I like about
Oddfellows Rest. That's what that record is called with the faces.
This strange name too. Like what a weird. But yeah, so those album covers sort of are of the spirit of like I wonder if it's like him doing them. Like they have the same kind of like effort and level of technique that like a Burst of Silence, right? Like a shitty 90s hardcore release would have. And what I think I'm kind of appreciating about Crowbar is I think they come from a very sympathetic / similar scene. Same for I Hate God. And I wasn't really quite aware of that back then. Those guys all seem like sort of the metal thing, but like the more I've sort of been listening to that New Orleans sludge, I hate that term. It's like as bad as grunge, but watching a lot of these videos of these live shows, like the I Hate God and Crowbar, it's like, oh, these look like New England hardcore shows to me. And I think maybe I don't like him, but Phil Anselmo might have a lot more cred than I realized too. It's interesting. That whole
he produced one of their records, right? They're like, or they had a side band with him.
Oh, there's so much. Phil Anselmo's like all based with all those dudes. He's had multiple bands with all those guys, and he was in like Phil Anselmo is like the cool New Orleans dude that moved to Texas, I think, and joined this band Pantera and then brought them back. But he was like a hardcore dude. He's just an asshole. I just don't like him. Yeah, he's important, but like a lot of that. He's in Down and he's Super Joint Ritual, and he was in Arson Anthem, I think, with Mike Williams from I Hate God, and I think he put I Hate God on the map because he wore that long sleeve in that Pantera video. It was the first time a lot of people had seen the name I Hate God. And then Pantera took I Hate God on tour, I think. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check out the more of that whole scene. Yeah, so far
you'll find it very familiar. You'll be like, oh shit, this is like New Orleans in the late 80s, early 90s, or through the 80s. It reminded me of like Massachusetts hardcore. Like, it made sense why Crowbar did eventually cross over into that sort of, I don't know if they were ever on Death Wish, but it did seem like they started to like associate maybe with like Converge and ISIS and those types of, you know what I mean? I
definitely, I didn't know much about them, but like when I'd see them mentioned, I always felt like it was more in a hardcore sort of context. So it kind of makes sense.
I saw them. Yeah, I saw them in the 90s. I think it was at Babyhead, but I don't remember who the show, but it was a hardcore bill. That's what I thought they were.
I mean, I thought they were a late 80s New York hardcore band, frankly, or like an early 90s New York hardcore band. I didn't know it, but I also didn't. I thought I Hate God were from Massachusetts for some reason. So.
Oh, really?
Well, what I know.
Pretty big. They were pretty popular with kids in Massachusetts, I think. Like all the when I first got exposed to Cave In and all the like North Andover bands and stuff, like Piebald. I remember there was like Gambit, Cave In's. Like there was a dude that was sort of in a lot of those bands. There was sort of like a lot of people that were like really into I Hate God, and I think they were like, it was like the first time, you know, they like meme about like Death Grips fans. It was sort of like, I like I Hate God, but I don't know. The vibe with their fans is kind of negative, a little too negative, you know, like Grief, all that kind of just the trickle down effect of it. I was into in mass.
I'm losing steam. Should we call it?
Oh, well, let me just round it up on the I Hate God note, because we were like sort of touching on Sabbath, was that revisited both of those. And I realized like how sort of beautiful it is in a way that that Sabbath almost created a genre of bands that are sort of revolve around the Iommi idea of intervals and like certain kinds of riffs. I sort of wrote it off for years with a few exceptions. Like Sleep kind of bored me, but like other bands like I Hate God or the Melvins, which were like, eh. But I had an epiphany around that because we were both like listening to I Hate God a lot. I mean, Sabbath. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, this is like the thing you can do over and over again in different arrangements, and it regenerates, like in the same way the Beatles.
So there is that aspect of Sabbath where it's real easy to see how to build on it. I'm like trying to think of a band where you're like, I like this, I would also like it if it was way noisier. With Sabbath, it's like not hard to somebody to be like, I want to take even Earth to be like, I want to take this and play it slow. Yeah, or like I want to take this, but I want to make it so noisy, like I Hate God or whatever. Like that's one where you can really see that it's just making it way dirtier sounding.
It's cool. It's cool though, because in a lot of ways, I wonder what Tony Iommi must be aware of them or know them or have heard, because at this point they're known. He has to have been. But like, I think what's interesting about the Sabbath I Hate God thing is they're doing the Iommi thing, but Jimmy Bower is such a fucking genius, or that band is so brilliant, and that the flavor of the Iommi thing is brought back to the root of the blues, Delta blues in the South. Like I Hate God don't sound like Sabbath imitators, but they're doing the Sabbath sort of thing. They sound distinctly Southern American, New Orleans. I think it's probably because they got a little bit of Skinner in there too, or like just Southern rock, like the better.
Yeah, it's got a swing to it.
Very much so. Yeah.
So what was the other band we were talking about?
Sabbath,
and I was,
but they Crowbar.
No, you sent me something else, and I was like. Yeah, and I was just like, this is just tedious. There's no need for more than one of these songs to exist, because it's just the same thing over and over again. Whereas like the I Hate God, it's got character too, and the vocalist is great. It's not just like a monotone shriek or whatever.
The only show I ever saw at Fort Thunder was with Grief. It was Man as the Bastard, Drop Dead, and Grief. I remember I didn't like it then either, and whatever. Yeah, no offense, like they do their thing. But yeah, the thing with I Hate God that's like really interesting is, as well as they also do sort of relate to like the Melvins, and I mean, I guess those guys say that the Melvins were obviously like huge influence on them. First I Hate God record is 88 too, so it's like really interesting, because even though they weren't related to grunge in any way, they sonically and musically absolutely like kind of relate directly to the Pacific Northwest shit. Like in an alternate universe, Nirvana, Tad, and I Hate God could have, should have, and it would have made total sense to be on like a bill together. You know what I mean? But
yeah, I could see that, because I think that's the thing that makes I Hate God so appealing too, is it sounds punk. And like I hadn't heard them before, and I was like, oh, this is like noisy Sabbath riffs with Sam McPheeters on vocals. Like this is great.
He does sound a lot like Sam. It's like a complete accident or coincidence, I think, but it was one of the first things I noticed because I got in them and like I think I bought Cake is Needed for Pain like around the time it came out in the 90s, and that was the big appeal for me. I was like, oh, it reminds me of Born Against, but it's like this really dark shit. Real
yeah
shit. It wasn't like
because it doesn't have like metal vocals either.
No, it's real punk vocals. Yeah, they're like
that's what makes it good.
Yeah, they're like First Take too. Like they're so imperfect.
Which I feel like this would be a good time at the very end of the episode to say that so we're trying something new because we've got 2 episodes out right now, 3 more that we're in the process of editing. Those 3 follow the same format as the first 2, which is that we talk about a single record from a variety of angles, the music to production, the graphic design, and they're fairly focused. And if you've seen the Lincoln episode, you've seen that we put a lot of effort into the editing and the visuals, which we're going to continue to do, but that takes a while. So we're trying this other kind of open-ended format in order to not have 5 weeks between episodes, and also to cover the sort of stuff that that we want to talk about, but maybe we don't want to sit down and be like, all right, we need to talk about Black Sabbath's Paranoid. Let's analyze it. And so just a sort of like a more ongoing kind of musical conversation. And so this is
cafe chat.
Yes. So this is the first one of these. So if you dig this format, let us know like in an Instagram comment or a YouTube comment or something. Not that we'll necessarily not do the other format, but it's nice to know if something is working or not. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap this guy up? Yeah, like and subscribe.
Hopefully that wasn't too